record it. Let's see. Yep. Okay, we're recording. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick, and we can go through the agenda, make sure that I didn't leave anything out. So we were planning on just saying hello. Stephanie's going to describe a virtual training opportunity, get some quick project updates, talk about any future task force project planning. Oh, and of course, a presentation from Melanie about briefest cancer survivorship data. And then our next meeting's in August. Did I leave anything out? No? Okay. If I could, I just, sometimes I'm in that awkward position in the room where I don't know everybody or I forget. So if you could just, hi, Melanie. If we could just say your name and where you work, that'd be very helpful. Donna, could I ask you to go first?
Sure. Donna Green, Clinical Director, Outpatient Care, Maine Med.
Okay, and Katie?
And I'm Katie Reed. I work at the Caring Connections program, which is the cancer support program through the Bangor Region YMCA.
Okay, great. And Barb?
Hi, Barb Perry. I'm the Survivorship Program Manager for the Maine Health Cancer Care Network.
Okay, and Stephanie?
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie McLeod Estevez. I'm a psychotherapist in private practice here in Portland, Maine. I own Creative Transformations, and I'm also a cancer survivor.
Okay, great. And then Melanie and Kathy, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves in a second, but I just want to make sure you know that you're being recorded, so you don't say anything, that could be used against you later in a court of law. So, okay. Okay. Melanie, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you this afternoon for some time. My name is Melanie Feinberg, and I'm the Program Manager for Comprehensive Cancer Control. I'm also right now acting as sort of a interim colorectal cancer program manager until we've staffed that new grant. So nice to see you all.
Okay. And Kathy? Oh, let's see. I can try to, yep, you're all set. Oh.
Oh, she's muted.
Myself.
I think I messed you up, so that's not your fault. I tried to unmute you. Okay.
Kathy Marquis-Gerard, cancer survivor, on the board and leadership team, and look forward to seeing you all again. Sorry I missed the last meeting.
Okay, we're glad you're here today on a summer Friday afternoon. That's impressive. All right, well, we can just make our way right through the agenda. Stephanie, if I could just ask you to talk a little bit about the project.
Yeah, so for those of you who were present over the past couple of meetings, I had been asked by the Bessie Wright Cancer Resource Center to run a presentation, a training on how to facilitate connections with groups doing online practice. And so after we talked about that, Aisha and I discussed that would be great to redo that presentation, but add a little bit to it. And so it's going to be available to anybody who's a part of the Maine Cancer Foundation. And so it's called Creating Connection Virtually with Cancer Patients. And it's going to be appropriate to whether or not you're working with individuals or groups. What are some of the ways, what are some of the things that come up that might impact your ability to feel confident to do that work, and how can you reconfigure how you approach your job and your mission to meet the virtual kind of context. And so it will be very similar to the presentation. Some of you were able to come to the presentation that we did. It will be similar to what I did. And so if you were there and you felt like, oh, I really wish Stephanie had addressed X, Y, or Z situation, feel free to email me because I can add that into what I'm tweaking for this particular presentation. And I think it's going to be, it's a 1 hour, virtual webinar. that will be recorded, and it's August 5th at noontime, right? So I'm looking forward to it, and I think it's really exciting that we're taking that, bringing that individual piece, individual practitioners, whether you're, a nurse practitioner, an oncologist, even, I'm not sure how many other layers of the office are interacting with patients virtually, but really anybody who wants a leg up in feeling like they can flex their virtual muscles and still do the job that we're all trying to do.
Yeah, I just read in the meeting notes that I typed up that Donna said in the last meeting, but that patients often need to be coached for telehealth as well. So
yes, include that, like having people. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and just this is my personal experience trying to meet with my son's pulmonologist via Zoom the other day. If you can't connect, who do you call? And it was like,
Hey,
press 1 to leave a message. I was like, I'm late.
Exactly. And having that backup plan. I mean, for the people who are able to come, we laughed because the day that I gave the presentation through Bessie Wright Center, I actually didn't have the normal internet connection I would typically do. And so I used my cell phone, which was great. But thank God I had printed up all of my notes, so having that is part of the presentation. Is how do you think through not just the face-to-face situation, but the pre-meeting plan, the backup plan, not making assumptions, that people know what they're doing, especially when you're talking about things like cancer. I mean, people's anxieties, people's feelings are already strong enough as it is. So we know that, when someone's sitting face to face with you and they're going through cancer, you might need to continue to repeat things because they're going to only hear so much each time they're with you. So, yes. So thank you. I will make sure that that is included.
Thanks. Oh, sorry, Kathy, go ahead.
Just a quick question. So in thinking about that, I know that you can record any Zoom meetings that you have. Would it be helpful with the permission of obviously the person you're talking with to record, to make that available for them so they can go back afterwards and just sort of replay it? And I was just wondering if that might be helpful.
I bet that's an ethical gray area at this point, in particular because, some Zoom meetings were uploaded during to the internet that should have been kept private. And so I would imagine that each organization, should this persist, if they want to look at that, will really have to sit with the technical and legal issues of doing that. But I do think it could be amazing. And, it's also a way to facilitate, I know, for example, my oncologist office was sending messages. I'm not going in regularly for appointments, thank goodness, but, not being able to have a family member with you and being in the room. So technically you're face to face with your providers, but then maybe you have your family member on speakerphone. And so I do think that tech could help some of these communications. They're not hearing everything really well, but I wonder how they're going to make it safe from that perspective. So who knows?
So at Maine Med, well, actually all of Maine Health, they're going to be starting a program with Amwell via the Epic side of things.
Okay.
And I don't know what functionality that's going to have. That would be a curious question, because if it's part of their My Chart, and they would have access to go back and look at it via My Chart, wouldn't that be interesting?
It could be an awesome resource for people. Yeah.
Right. I'll once we get going, I'll ask about that. But I hear what you're saying about the Zoom side. But we're being told that this is going to be the best thing. It's going to be some of the best thing, but it's not going to give us everything we like in the Zoom side of things now. But it could be curious if there would be an opportunity to record and then have that available via My Chart.
Yeah.
thought.
Especially for family members. I like that idea that you brought that up, because as a family member, if I had someone, and to be able to know that it was recorded, if I couldn't be there or didn't have access or got cut off, that I'd be able to go back and just help and kind of watch and, come up with questions that I might have or follow up. But yeah, I think that would benefit. It would be awesome.
Yeah. Well, that will bring a whole other conundrum for providers to like work through their performance anxiety. But I agree. I think it could be phenomenal. Yeah.
Well, we're really looking forward to it. I need to pull together the advertising paragraph, et cetera, and then I'll push it out certainly to this group, and then other organizations like the Northern New England Clinical Oncology Society or oncology providers. And I love that it's going to incorporate office staff, everybody coming in. So that's fabulous. And thank you very much. It's a great example of a task force project growing and creating statewide, scaling up a pilot project that was working really well. So thanks, Stephanie.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, great. Well, Melanie, I think we're ready to move into your presentation, which I'm really looking forward to. I don't know if you want to share your screen with slides or if you'd like me to pull them up. Either way works.
Actually, how about this? While I start talking, pull up the survivorship brief. I have the slides here, and when I jump into the slides, I'll take over and advance the slides.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I'll pull up the brief in a sec.
Super. So good afternoon. This isn't really a presentation of, formal presentation. This is the beginning of a dialogue about how we might begin to use the new coming BRFSS survivorship data. And I'm going to just provide a little bit of background and acknowledge some of you who worked on the survivorship brief that Aisha is bringing up. This was just coming to its final edit as I was arriving almost a year ago. This is briefest data. It's from 2011 to 2016, so it's a 5-year data set, but it's a little bit, it's 2011 to 2016, so put that in context. And this was derived via the existing briefest core questions. So we didn't have to pay any extra for these questions. We do have a lot of financial burden in terms of, slicing and dicing the data. So, this is important for us all to understand because there's certain briefest data that we can get from the core and not pay extra. There's certain ways we can look at it. That's all part of the existing cancer surveillance plan. And you could see the stuff that's in this brief if you went over to maine.gov to our community health needs assessment, that fondly known as the China report, you would see this stuff. So, this is, basically the down and dirty basic information that we could glean from existing. Now, fast forward to a couple years ago, the state of Maine was actually given an opportunity to get an extra $200,000 over 3 years for survivorship. And it was a feasibility sort of pilot because by the time we go back for a competitive 5-year grant this time next year, survivorship will actually be part of the National Comprehensive Cancer Control Program. Just yesterday, we had a kickoff meeting for the new colorectal screening grant, and the national leadership began with a slide introducing the 3 pillars of comp cancer moving forward. And those 3 pillars will be, and I'm very excited about this, and Barb, I know you're going to be very excited about this, but the 3 pillars will be prevention, screening. 3rd pillar is now survivorship and wellness.
Whoa.
Yes. So, I expect that, only a few states got that survivorship pilot money. So we were very fortunate to have it. But, just so everyone knows, we were required to buy these new survivorship briefest questions with that money. So once you subtract what we were required to invest in briefest survivorship, you know, that 200,000 is even smaller. So, you know, just some context and some background. You know, we all really like to look at data. We're required to use it in our work plans. It's great when we want to mobilize community partners, but it comes at a very stiff cost. So moving forward, we want to make sure that we can use this information. And this is the group that we're going to continuously come back to and say, you know, is this of value? Is this not? Now, I did have some influence over which of the new survivorship questions we were going to use. And I want to get into that as we go into the details, but I'm just going to pause for a moment while Aisha gives me control of the screen, and I'm happy to entertain any questions at this point before we get into the new questions.
I guess, Melanie, I think I know the answer to the question, but I just want to make sure everyone knows like how the process of the briefest, how many people are polled, and what it means to add questions. That's all, just very general. Like, you know, do people's cell phones get called? And how long it takes, and who the sample size is.
So those are all great questions. Right now, with the addition of this survivorship core questions, and these are 2020 core questions, okay? So these are questions that they just started asking as of January 1st. And already we are hearing from national briefest coordinators, our regional and our state briefest coordinators, that, you know, no surprise to anyone, 2020 briefest has been very, very challenging. Our dear friend and colleague Molly Schwen actually shared with the group that she got her briefest call. And even Molly Schwen, who so appreciates this information, it was like right at the beginning of COVID-19, it was March, and she just had 0 patients for the briefest call. And so that's pretty much happening nationwide. So there's a lot of chatter out there at the national level even now about this, not only briefest data, but this is going to be a period of time where people's regular tried and true data sources, you know, are going to be kind of challenged and suspect. So briefest 2020, the middle of global pandemic, you know, we're going to have to take it with a grain of salt, I think, basically. Now, you touched on another really important controversy for briefest, Aisha, which is, you know, cell phones versus landlines. And, you know, they're evolving towards, you know, cell phones. But right now, you've already got a sub-selected group because it's only landlines that they're hitting with the survey. So, you know, they identified that, you know, 5 years ago as, you know, a trend that we needed to, you know, embrace and think about. But, you know, when you think about briefest data and all of its warts, you know, there's no perfect data source, but it's interesting to me how much we hang our hats on the briefest data, because even when you're not in the middle of a global pandemic, you know, it's got some, you know, shortcomings. But, you know, the questions are answered throughout the calendar year. That's why there's some delay with getting the information. One thing that's kind of concerning to all of us right now is our state of Maine briefest survey is upwards of 30 minutes. I don't know about you, but keeping me on the line for 30 minutes is, you know, I don't have 30 minutes at supper time to like talk to the briefest people. But what happens is over the time, you know, everyone wants to buy their own questions. We add state questions, you know, there's core questions, and then, you know, a program comes along like Comp Cancer who has a little additional seed money for survivorship, so we add more questions. So, you know, there's a little bit of redundancy between core questions, supplemental questions, and state questions. Every time we feel like, well, that generic question isn't quite right, I need this other question, you know, there's a consequence for that, and it's minutes added to the survey. And so if you get up over 20 minutes, the data says that people start to like hang up on you. So then there's all this political jockeying to try to get your questions at the front of the survey because you want to get your questions in before they hang up on you. So, you know, and me as the new person, you know, I went to my first briefest meeting a month after I arrived in October. And, you know, I keep raising the question of, you know, when are we going to talk about over 30 minutes problem? You know, because I feel like, you know, we'd be willing to give up a question or streamline a group of questions if it was for the greater good, right? If there was some way we could collaboratively meet some consensus, I think it would be better for everybody, even if you had to like compromise a little teeny bit. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I really want to add to Briefest, but right now we're kind of like managing folks' expectations, is there's a new module on prostate cancer screening, shared decision making. So, you know, there's a lot of interest in that, but, you know, there you go, add a couple more minutes. So I think that that's, you know, again, one of the foibles of this Briefest business. I will tell you that Briefest just went out for competitive bid. It's not just like a state government thing. Across the country, there are some states where the state agency is not the holder of the Briefest. It might be another nonprofit or something like a Qualidyne, you know, and that process is ongoing right now. We, of course, submitted a bid because we've always been the Briefest people. Here in Maine, I believe, but we don't have any idea at this time if, you know, somebody else submitted a bid or, you know, so that's kind of like the point where we're at right now. But, you know, Maine Briefest, you know, it's not in even our division. It's like, you know, at a very much higher level. I can share one other example of a community, like the Maine Lung Cancer Coalition that some of you may be involved in. They have funded some state developed questions targeted around lung cancer screening. And that was really important when they were launching their, you know, multi-year initiative. You know, it may be time at this point to say, well, do we start asking about prostate cancer shared decision-making in lieu of, you know, some of the other screening questions. But, you know, I've yet to figure out exactly when and what venue are these higher level conversations going to take place. But now that Comp Cancer, we're one of the biggest users of this. And, you know, as we get questions about Briefest, we reach out to you guys, the subject matter experts, through the coalition. So know that your voice does matter, and you know, you have really good conduit to influence it. So great questions, Aisha. Any more questions before we dive in? And do you guys see my slide now?
Yep.
Okay, great. And that means I can advance it, right? Right. Super. Okay, so like I said, I arrive and I'm told you've got to buy these questions. There are 3 packages of survivorship questions. There were only 6 states in the country that had piloted these questions. So I immediately surveyed the 6 and found out which combinations of these 3 modules were these other 6 states using. And it was like all across the board. The third module, which is specifically around pain management and chronic pain, that was the module that most states, if they couldn't afford the whole 3 modules, that's the one that they seemed to get rid of the most. But that was one that I thought our palliative care and end-of-life colleagues would be particularly interested in, and one that seemed to be pretty actionable, you know, living with pain. So we kept it in. But anyway, first module is all about your type of cancer. And, you know, you can understand as being consumers of this data why you'd want to know if someone was a survivor of multiple cancers or just one cancer, you know, how old were they? It's just emerging now that the AYA population, as a matter of fact, is going to be considered a target population for health inequity and disparity in oncology. So the AYA population is definitely something that I'm going to be very focused on for future initiatives. So this age question, very important. What type of cancer? You know, and I think Maine Health is a beautiful example of, you know, they've developed over the years these tumor site specific survivorship care plans. You know, cancer patients are very different from, you know, disease to disease. By knowing, you know, if there's any differential between the types of cancers, we might be able to shift gears or change course and, you know, realize that, oh, there's, you know, a population of pancreas cancer patients that are really not getting survivorship. So that's module number 1. Module number 2, course of treatment. Now, it's kind of a shame. I'm interested in your comments on this. Some of the questions in module 2 are very focused on a survivorship care plan. So have you ever received instructions from a doctor, nurse, or healthcare professional about where you should return? Were these instructions written down or printed on paper for you? You know, now that the COC guidelines have changed and the focus is a little bit broader than just a survivorship care plan, you know, I don't know whether these questions will stay here or evolve in some way. I think a few years ago when we were also focused on counting plans, this might have been helpful, but I'm wondering if this just isn't, you know, gonna go away as things evolve. I think the questions about insurance are very, very good, and I will refer you guys back to the survivorship brief. At least back in 2011 to 2016, you know, 95% of our cancer survivors reported that they had health care coverage. 96 reported they were seeing a doctor ongoing. 83% of them had had a physical within the last year. So we were doing really well back in that era. Be interesting to see what our current data says and whether we've improved or, you know, and not just 2020. Again, we're gonna cold suspect anything that we learned from 2020, at least for now. And the one question, of course, is very, very important at the very bottom of this one is the clinical trials question. And again, you know, the geriatric oncology population, the AYA population, totally underrepresented in clinical trials. You know, we really need this information because once the world reopens, we've got to get our clinical trial machines back online. Very important. Any thoughts or questions or feedback about modules 1 and 2? Okay. So our third module, and again, you know, from the briefest, the survivorship brief, you know, 1 in 5 of our cancer survivors experienced 14+ days of poor physical health. 1 in 7 experienced 14+ days of poor mental health. You know, there's a lot of opportunity, especially in the community setting, for more, you know, palliative care, survivorship support. I think it's kind of gray when you start mixing palliative care and survivorship, but you've got survivors who have cancer, who are living a long time. You know, we've got to kind of, I think, not get so hung up on terms and think about innovative ways to, you know, do something about this. Because, you know, when I see these stats about patients walking around with 14+ days of, you know, either physical or mental distress, you know, I feel like we're just really failing them. And it may not be medical interventions necessarily that, you know, we really need, like more clinics, et cetera, but maybe they need, you know, some warm palliative care support, you know. There's some emerging information coming out now about how folks are managing survivors in the COVID reality. So, you know, stay tuned for some of that, you know, because I think those will be opportunities that might also come with some future funding opportunities. You know, like the work that you're doing, Stephanie, with your, you know, tele support, you know, those are the kinds of things that they're fishing for right now.
It's super important. I was going to say the one thing, I love this slide. It would have been interesting if they would have said, do you have any physical or emotional pain caused by your cancer? Cancer treatment would have been kind of interesting add there, just because pain is obviously not just a physical phenomenon.
Well, let's hold that thought, because I think this may just be a oversimplified slide. So I wasn't even sure I was going to show this to you guys, and I don't want you to get hung up on this horrible slide. But this is the draft right now that the data team is working on for our cancer metrics. And, you know, there's all sorts of ways we can slice and dice this for the survivorship population. But, you know, what's being recommended to us right now by the EPIs is, you know, there's some healthy behavior stuff about healthy eating and physical activity, but then reduce the number of poor mental health and physical health days. Do we want to look at it separately, mental health, physical health? We want to look at it as a calculated variable for frequent 14 plus of both physical and mental. I mean, I think what I'm hearing you say is that it would be important to slice and dice this so we could pull out physical from the psychosocial distress.
Or just even, it's interesting because I think about the power of words and sort of planting seeds that sometimes physical pain, I mean, most physical pain has emotional pain attached, and most emotional pain has physical pain attached. So just sort of, it's reinforcing that mind, body, spirit connection. So I think it's great that those are outlined in areas that need to be addressed. And a lot of times in the work that I do with clients, whether it's workshop, support group, or individual, because they don't have anybody speaking to what are the psychological effects of cancer, they don't often even recognize some of the less quote unquote obvious effects of cancer, and how, you know, for example, a client of mine, you know, they found some lumps and then they just cleared it through ultrasound, and the next day when we were meeting, she's like, I'm just so profoundly tired. And I was like, well, that's the PTSD adrenaline release that you're feeling, you know, because even though you were feeling fairly confident things were fine, just having to go through that procedure once again, it doesn't matter if your mindset's good, you're going to have these different responses to it. And so that piece of helping people understand is so important for them, increasing their awareness of what's going on.
Yeah, yeah.
I had a couple of thoughts on that, because I think it's a continuum. So I think it's hard to separate the what we call term medical versus the emotional support and the mental health piece. And when we do, I go back to a couple of survivors that I know quite say, you know, I'm a survivor, but the minute they tell you you're cancer free or whatever, and you just mentioned it, it's that release and that unknowing it's always there. But you're sort of left at your own devices, you know, you're left with wondering. So I think people's mind is when they say, well, it's not medical. I'm not feeling good. I'm in pain, you know, mental health. But they resist going because it's perceived as it's not medical. So, you know, I think if there's any way we can, again, continue to have those conversations, blur the lines, see that it's a continuum, and not delineate, if that makes sense. It just, you know, I think the more we do that, especially as we come really to know people who aren't going in for treatments now or delaying treatments, and, you know, it's the unknowing that's the constant state of anxiety that is just as painful and just as, you know, detrimental to your health and your survivorship than anything. So just a couple of thoughts.
Yeah. We are whole people, you know, the holistic view of who we are and how it all works together. I agree with what you're saying.
Melanie, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit because there are so many questions in briefest, but are there any related specifically, like not in the cancer section, for lack of a better word, but related to mental health and depression in our state? Because
yes.
yeah, and do they slice and dice the data in a way that kind of takes that into
well,
account?
actually, going back to the page, the flip side of, you know, the the survivorship brief, excuse me. And I was kind of surprised by this. I don't know about you guys, but, you know, the only thing they teased out for this one pager was depressive disorders. And, you know, there wasn't a statistical difference. It was within the confidence intervals between cancer survivors and the other population. And that really stands out because with all the other medical conditions that we list, cancer survivors were much higher than the general population. And I made this assumption, you know, that there would be a lot more, but, you know, I know that that's kind of limiting depressive disorders. You know, there could be other whatevers that were not captured in here. And I really can't tell you exactly what falls in that definition. And again, remember, when we start getting into medical conditions from briefest data, this is self-reported by people like you and me who may not necessarily, you know, whatever. We just had a great debate with the skin group this week about the youth briefest questions about, you know, do we change it from 15% SPF to 30 SPF? And we're asking kids, like, do you think any kid like really pays attention to the number on the bottle? You know, I doubt it. You know, their mother is making them put on some lotion. You know, that's, you know. But.
We used to only pay attention when we were trying to get the best tan possible. You know, oh, I've moved down from 8 to 4. And next week I'm going full oil.
Crazy.
But I doubt my kids pay attention to it now.
Right. So, you know, I was just going to send out the link to the Maine briefest survey, and, you know, it's daunting. I'm not going to lie. It's like almost 30 pages long, and it's got all the skip patterns, and, you know, and there's like this path A, path B. But you can, the index is good, and you can see the survivorship modules, you can see the cancer specific questions, you can even see that proposed prostate module, I think it is in there, even though we're not doing that one. But, you know, it's dense, but you give it a look because you can see kind of, but again, disclaimer and caution, you know, there's the buying of questions, and then there's the buying of epidemiologist time to slice and dice. And, you know, there's stuff that happens automatically and it gets posted out online. And then there's special things that we want to drill down in a certain way. And, you know, there are limits, like, you know, your budget, everybody's budget, there's limits. And even with briefest data and this other type of data, I've got to say, I don't think that this is a problem that would be solved if we had unlimited dollars. There's just limited capacity to analyze these big data sets. So even if money were no object, there's limits. So that's why, you know, groups like these are really, really important, you know, because you're the ones that would be looking at this and saying, aha, you know, that suggests to me that we ought to do X, Y, and Z. So if you ever feel like, you know, we're dishing up information that you just like don't ever see as being actionable, you know, you take it as your job to say, why are you collecting this? Sometimes it's completely out of our control, but, you know, that's what we need to hear from you, subject matter experts.
So Melanie, I had a question.
Yo.
Is there a way for them to tease out the, have you ever had skin cancer, down to what kind of skin cancer, so that we can?
Yeah, we actually do that, Barb, and they can slice and dice that, and but, you know, if they do that on every one, not necessarily. But this is set up so that they can tease out, because in the cascade of questions, they isolate the skin cancer patients.
Because I think it makes a big difference if you've had basal cell versus melanoma.
Right.
And when you're trying to compare our numbers to ACS numbers, their numbers are very different for the number of survivors that we have in the state.
Right. And again, you know, consider the source. I'm not sure I would go to briefest for the breakdown of Maine cancer diagnosis. I'd go to Maine Cancer Registry for real, you know, curated data on Maine cancer diagnoses. Because again, all of these cancer types are reported by people. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've had people ask me about their bone cancer, only to come to find out when you talk to them, it's really a bone met from a breast cancer or a colon cancer, or you know, but they think they have bone cancer, or grandma had bone cancer.
So does that mean that ACS is getting their survivorship numbers from the cancer registry?
Yes.
Okay.
ACS data is, you know, is NCDB data.
Yeah. Okay.
And NCDB data is the Commission on Cancer Hospitals reporting to the National Cancer Database.
Yeah. Okay.
And ACS, I mean, lots of people don't know this, but ACS funds that arm of COC. They fund the National Cancer Database. So that, you know, think about NCDB data then for a second. You know, I know in this country, it's about 80% of patients who actually get their cancer care at a COC or a COC affiliate, but that NCDB data only represents those people that are getting COC standard-driven care. What about the other 20%? You know, what about them? And that's where you have to go to registry data. But most state registries really, it's an incidence, first course of treatment. It's not really on the outcome side of things. They don't collect follow-up. I know Barb was asking these questions because of the nature of, a mild skin cancer, but there are other cancers out there too. You know, we collect a lot of, you know, borderline, benign and borderline, both CNS and GYN types of cytologies that, you know, no one's going to really be impacted by either. So, you know,
right.
It's interesting, but it's so good to have, you know, that's why you guys are the experts. You know the nuances and what to sort of like ask for a little bit more, you know, and not just assume.
So Melody, what kind of demographic information is collected other than gender and types of cancer? What else is collected, and then what else might be helpful as we drill down specifically in some of these areas?
That's a super good question. So they do all of the OMB demographics, race, ethnicity, that kind of thing. Their LGBTQ plus question right now, it's a lag thing. It's not, you know, politically correct at this moment. It's a little bit antiquated. So they've got to, you know, Briefus has got to catch up and get the new definition, and they've got to roll that out. Because, you know, one of the demographics that, you know, we're really concerned about here in Maine is the LGBTQ plus population. We've, you know, received a national score of 0, the state of Maine, in terms of our sensitivity around this population and population health. So, you know, we really need to get to this population. And then we've talked about 2 other groups, you know, that we could get to through basic demographics, and that's our geriatric oncology population and our adolescent and young adult, our AYA population. Lots of controversy about the quality of that race and ethnicity data, but the self-reported stuff is a little bit better than, you know, what our hospital registration system is picking up on. So it's just that normal set that you would anticipate with a few flaws, meaning that it's usually behind, you know, on the latest definitions. Is there a group, you know, a target population that you folks are, you know, eager to have more information about, or that you would like to see teased out?
I think certainly, I mean, I won't speak for others, but with this new, not renewed attention on health disparities and equities, how to translate that conversation into Maine so that, you know, people here can recognize inequities about being rural, about socioeconomic status. It's not just about race, although it is, of course, about that as well. It would be helpful if there's data that can back up, rationale for funding or projects.
Right, absolutely. On my US CDC feed a couple nights ago, the headline was that almost 17,000 food, like meat packing, food packing people in the US had been infected by COVID, and 87% of those had a racial or ethnic disparity. 87%. And that's just within one industry, so it's not that, much of a revelation, but still, I mean, that is just staggering. And we can do that with core briefus. And again, I'd encourage you guys to go to maine.gov and look at the community health needs assessment tables, and you can have a lot of fun with that and play around with that, what's publicly available.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing that is always helpful for me is understanding where Maine is different from the rest of the country. So in terms of radon, but also I think melanoma is a really good example, whereas in the rest of the US it's decreasing, but here in Maine that's not the case. But as a way of calling out a need for funding or programming and making sure that we're, as a state, not just reading national headlines and assuming that we're following.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And those, that's exactly why, Aisha, at least the way it was explained to me, where our cancer surveillance is starting to go in the form of groupings. So you guys remember from the last surveillance plan, and if you've looked at the China reports, we're starting to lump together obesity-associated cancers, HPV-associated cancers, to try to be able to get enough patients that then we can drill down on target populations within those. Because sometimes in Maine, our numbers get really small really fast. Making it hard to seek funding to do initiatives when your potential impact is small.
Right. And one of the things that's characteristic about Maine, though, is our really high percent of the population that's elderly, that's over 65. So the geriatric population is really important in that regard.
And the prevalence of asthma, aren't we one of the top states in the Northeast as far as pollutants, but the incidence of asthma with young children and with older adults? I don't know, does anybody know off the top of their head what the number on that is? But number.
I don't know the number, but I have a colleague, Eric Fromberg, he's the program manager. Like, I'm the program manager for comp cancer. He's the program manager for asthma. And I had no idea how much of a problem it was in Maine. I really didn't appreciate the full scope of radon and arsenic. So yeah, I think asthma is a huge problem in the state of Maine, and you add COVID on top of that to that population, and you've got a soup of, not such a great situation. Right.
I guess I was very interested in hearing more about how the data is processed in different states. And I know it's not about ownership per se, but who has access to the big sets of briefest data? And if there's not capacity at the state to analyze it, is it allowed or permissible to allow other organizations to process that data?
Absolutely. And those, they're so, and just in the state of Maine, there are many cooks in the kitchen. There's the USM EPIs, but before them, there's another company that just takes the data extract. And then there's the national data that you can get. And if you go to the briefest links, there are large data, exports that you can do yourself and do some slicing and dicing. One thing that's required, right now Maine.gov is in charge of Maine's briefest data, but you're required that it be a community kind of thing, and you're required to share it. So that's why you'll see a lot of briefest out there on the China dashboards or China dashboards, whatever we say. But it's very variable from state to state. You know, when I was researching those 6 states that piloted the survivorship questions, 4 of the 6 states had these beautiful briefest summary annual reports. So I was able to see, you know, what they did with it and how they dished it up. But 2 states, you would never have guessed they did any briefest at all. I couldn't find it anywhere. Had to make phone calls. And Maine is kind of like somewhere in the middle. You know, we tend to put out things like the survivorship brief was released, and there was fanfare, and it's posted out on the website. But other than these tables through the China dashboard and the stuff that we'll have linked to the cancer plan, you know, you'd really have to go hunting and know where it was and probably get some assistance to find it. I was kind of, you know, I was kind of hoping that someone might throw in their hat for Briefus, because I think it, you know, here it's just one of many data sources, you know. But if it, let's see, let me think of an organization like, I don't know, CORE maybe, or Qualidon, or somebody else had hold of that, and that was their one thing, you know, maybe we'd get something a little bit more efficient and more streamlined. But that's just my fantasy, I guess. Again, though, when you start to tie Briefus metrics to a work plan and you're reporting to the feds on a regular basis, then you realize, conversely, how much data that we have that we never do anything with at all. You know? So, you know, there's a lot out there that no one's really being mindful of, and it's certainly not informing new initiatives. So the challenge is, you know, how can we fully get our money's worth out of the, you know, the existing data, you know, with all of its warts. But I feel like that's part of my job, to try to make sure that, you know, Maine is getting as much value out of, you know, what we're investing in Briefus. Because there are many steps of this, and it all takes, you know, dollars to fund it. And not all comes from cancer. You know, all programs across the state are invested in Briefus. Now, there's another data source coming on strong that some of you may not have heard about yet, but we've been working with Health InfoNet. We, the Maine, state of Maine, started with health, diabetes, and cardiovascular dashboards, but then they moved on to a breast, cervical, and now colorectal screening dashboard. When I arrived, they had validated breast and cervical by working with the Maine Breast Cervical Health Program. We are only just standing up a colorectal program, so we hope to do some validating. But, you know, it wouldn't be that Health InfoNet screening data would ever replace Briefus screening data, but it would be great for Maine to have 2 sources of screening data that you could sort of, you know, annually say, okay, you know, Briefus says we're here, and the Health InfoNet data says we're here, you know. Always good to kind of validate and back up, you know, what you think is happening with another source. Great dialogue, great questions. I don't know, I didn't intend to like bomb your entire meeting.
No, it's good.
I'm happy to keep talking, but you know, I'm also happy to be quiet too. I think I was just gonna send out, like I said, the whole questionnaire, and there'll be more check-ins with you guys over the next 3 or 4 months as we are, you know, backing into these metrics for the cancer plan. And certainly moving forward, when we start to see some of this new data, you know, you guys will be the target audience for this. So stay tuned.
Yeah, this is fabulous, Melanie. Thank you so much for taking the time to pull together the slides and the information and provide some background, because I think for me, I'll speak for myself, a missing piece has been knowing more about the data, how it's collected, and how that can help our other work. But also I should mention that Melanie is going to be attending or more involved with the Association of Maine Cancer Support Centers. So in this group, we've talked about how to better integrate survivorship with community support, so that connection is there as well. So certainly that group will learn more about this as well. So, and I know there's some cross-pollination even within this group with that association. So,
and another cross-pollination, because I know some of you may be, interested in this as well, but I have a strong background in palliative and end-of-life care. I'm now the liaison to the state of Maine's Palliative Care and Quality of Life Advisory Council. Been on the board of directors for Hospice of Maine for many years, and I chair their quality committee. And I just, again, see a lot of potential for cancer survivorship and community-based palliative care crossover. And just, all I hear about is just huge gaps and such incredible need. So I'd ask all of you guys to noodle on that as well. Because Maine just got funded for the BOLD grant, which is an Alzheimer dementia type of grant. And we just got another notice of funding opportunity this week that was also targeted on the elderly. And I haven't even seen that one, but every time I see those new dollars, I'm thinking, elderly, frail cancer survivors, elderly, frail folks living with cancer, and wanting to do a better job for them.
great. Well, thank you so much for all the information. You are more than welcome to stay for the entire meeting, but it's also, I know you've been busy in meetings all morning, so.
Yeah, well, I actually got released from my COVID phone shift this morning, so that was nice. But I will say goodbye to you all because I have a couple of end-of-day deadlines, and I will try moving forward to attend this meeting more regularly as you guys get past the cancer plan, deliverable, and we start to really begin to talk about, what's next, because I'm very, invested in that what's next piece. So hope you're all well and safe, and I'll see you all at some point face to face.
Yeah, have a great weekend.
Thanks, bye guys.
Thank you. Bye.
And Melanie, if you could just, yeah, perfect, unshare your screen. Great, thank you.
I'll get there.
No, it's good. Thanks, you're all set. All right, well, next up on the agenda, we have just project updates. And the first one was related to the disability project. And this was described in the last meeting notes too. That's the one that Luann Cameron has been very interested in doing. I think right now she's still in Canada visiting her new grandchild. So she has been very good about saying, I'm sorry I don't have updates, but she's still very interested. So I will send her along the meeting notes and recording, God willing, the recording. And then the next update would be related to vocational services. So we had that long presentation at our last meeting, which was great. I promised to write something up that we could share with the broader community, and Barb very nicely offered to support and review what I wrote. And I just have to own up to the fact that I have not done that yet. So I will, and Barb, I'll be reaching out to you for some help. But part of the reason I think I procrastinated a little bit or stumbled in thinking about it is I wasn't sure, and I wanted to ask you guys, what audience should I be writing to in terms of health literacy? So is this meant for providers, like to go into a provider newsletter, or to go to patients? No. And everybody can edit it and make what they want of it, but.
All right. If we were putting it out to patients, like what sort of mechanisms would we have compared to providers?
I think it would be something to put in like a cancer support center, maybe on a brochure or a leaflet or something like that. And it can be both too. There can be two versions of it, but it would change the way I write it.
Yeah.
I think that I found it really confusing to understand what all the resources were and where you went to get them. And so I think if we write something for patients, everyone will benefit.
Right.
It might be relatively new information
for providers as well. And I think the goal is to let people know that there are resources out there, and we don't have to describe them completely, but we need to let people know where to go.
Yeah, I second that.
Okay. I like that headline, and maybe, or sorry, I like that idea. Maybe the headline could be, do you want to go back to work and have questions about your benefits? Okay.
Or yeah, or just letting people know that you can go back to work and there are people that will help you.
All right. I like that better.
Yeah, that's great.
All right. Yeah. All right. All right. So I will do that next week at the latest, and Barb, send that over to you.
I was gonna say there's no rush, and I've been desperately trying to take some time off, and it keeps getting pushed out. And it's like now I can't take time off till August because there's too much going on this month. So I think the fact there's just like 6 of us, it's a busy time of year. So I don't think you should put pressure on yourself.
Okay. Thanks. All right. Well, thanks for that. I mean, it's funny because usually we all go on vacation or somewhere, but now with COVID,
I know.
and you can just call in, so you don't really have a great excuse anymore.
I know.
I feel like I have more meetings this summer than ever before, which is great in some ways. But it's busy. All right, so I will write that up. The third agenda item was just general updates related to rehabilitation and survivorship. I don't know if, again, Barb, putting you on the spot, but you've been working hard on what you described as a book group on Zoom focused on survivorship and how that's going.
Yeah, I mean, I've only had one class so
Okay.
far. So the next class is going to be in a couple of weeks, and yeah, it was great. But it's also something that's designed for Maine health clinicians to try to increase awareness about survivorship, and to get staff sort of focused on recognizing that just because people are done with treatment doesn't mean that they're all done with our service or care, that the care trajectory continues, and begin to think about what are some of the resources. So the next time that we're meeting, we're going to talk about navigation, and we're also going to talk about integrative therapies, and just an opportunity, I think, for people to be able to think, acupuncture may be super helpful for certain kinds of long-term side effects. And who do we know? And maybe we ought to be referring people. So kind of putting out what some of the evidence base is and opening minds. The only person that's not part of the Maine health world is Dr. Dennis. She really wanted to participate, and so I said, okay. But she bought her book. I wouldn't buy her a book. Actually, I didn't have any left. I gave them all out. But I think that the whole idea of navigating people in the phase of survivorship once they're done with treatment is kind of a new concept, and I don't know how much that's being done, in organizations, at least across Maine. And I want to kind of think about what's our capacity for that. How do we cope with that? What are some sort of, solutions?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we just have to think about what's possible. What can we do? Rather than putting Band-Aids on things. Now, how do we begin to move in a new direction, and what kinds of resources are there? And I think a group like this can be a real extension of what some of the clinical practices are doing, and also is a connection with the community support centers and the other community efforts that are out there. So, and I think that that's right there is a big awareness piece. I think a lot of people know about the Dempsey Center, but I don't, because it has such a big name, and Patrick Dempsey and the Dempsey Challenge, but I don't think everyone knows about the other centers. And Katie, you may say yes, but I think just increasing awareness of what's out there and figuring out ways to get our clinicians aware, and how do we communicate and how do we direct patients.
Thanks for that update. I'm just gonna say this so that you can have it in the back of your mind, but in working with the patient navigators over the past several months and the Association of Maine Cancer Support Centers, and then even just in private conversations with, let's say, social workers, it's like that missing link, whether that's an electronic platform or a person. Okay, I have a patient that needs to get from like Caribou to Scarborough. What do I do? And I don't know where to start. And then having someone, take the time and call them back. And then the concern that you're going to send a patient to a dead end where they're going to have to then make more phone calls, which is the worst kind of referral. So we have just been talking more about at Maine Cancer Foundation with other groups, like, is there value in having a Maine health system agnostic resource navigator for cancer patients? So, because we've talked a lot about how to pull together like an electronic platform, and there's Aunt Bertha, and then there's 211, and they're wonderful, but they don't provide that warm handoff. Like, we don't know if that program has run out of money in June. So if we send a patient there, and that's just maddening for I think providers and for patients. So I'm just putting that out in the universe. If you have any thoughts or ideas for the future.
Are you saying, when you say we, are you talking about MCF?
Yeah, I mean, yes. So, it's not a behind the curtain conversation, but
yeah,
like you're saying, what solutions are there, and then making sure.
I just think you guys have been incredible partners and incredible resources for a lot of us. So I'm just happy to know that you're thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference too, though, in terms of providing direct services for patients. So I wouldn't want anybody at Maine Cancer Foundation to pretend that we have expertise in navigation or anything like that, but just a keeper of the resources, wherever that happens, or if it's a person or a spreadsheet. If you have any ideas, please let me know. I think I've been thinking a lot about that. Okay, were there any other general updates? Or?
I was going to say, Donna, do you have any comments about navigation and survivorship navigation specifically? Put you right on the spot.
So no, but I know that Barb in particular has had interest about what a survivorship navigation is. I mean, the challenge of navigation, I don't know that the word navigation really covers all the needs. So people tend to say, well, let's just get a navigator and then that'll take care of everything. Yeah. And I think I look at it a little bit differently. I almost feel like survivorship moves into a health coach more than a survivorship navigator, because a navigator to me is implying illness, challenges, chronic kind of stuff. And when you move into survivorship, it feels like, yeah, you've got some things you've got to deal with, but there's a freedom part that's not illness and task, and right. And so to me, the coaching aspect seems better. So when we think about navigation, I'm not sure that the word navigation is the right role or word, but there's parts of navigation that absolutely coach, et cetera. But I'm just trying to get my head around it. Funding something like that is really challenging. So it feels like when you think about cancer and you think about chronic illness, it feels like, would there be an opportunity to work with our chronic disease colleagues and think about cancer and health coach and that sort of thing? So I have just a different twist on things just because of the mindset and what that means. And in the world of navigation, we're always talking about a lot of the barriers and challenges. And I'm not saying survivors don't have that, but again, it's a different mindset. And to me, I would like to feel more celebratory and supportive, and instead of always hitting all the hard spots. So that's my take on it. I have no idea about any kind of funding, but it feels like if we could figure out partnerships with folks that have similar challenges, if you think about renal disease and end-stage renal disease, some things are no different than what you would see in, cancer survivors, where they might have had a secondary illness and now things aren't so great or something. So I always try to think broadly about where else could we kind of develop some partnerships that might be helpful. I certainly like, I love the folks, thinking about back to work options and how do we how do we get people back to what their normal might be. I'm just not sure the navigation world is really what it needs, but I'm not sure what it needs. I'm just not sure.
So I agree that once you're done with your active treatment, there's a freeing that the world opens up. And I think of the navigators, if they're in a clinical setting, as launching patients and getting them out there and letting them know what the resources are. And it's interesting that one of the projects we had talked about was connecting our cancer survivors with the health coaches. And the health coaches didn't know anything about oncology or survivorship. And I looked around to see if I could find training for them. And I didn't really find anything that was kind of an evidence-based thing. George Washington University has something for community navigators, that free online program. And so I think it's moving out of the clinical space and into the community space. We just have to get patients there. And I think the funding part of it is challenging. Health coaches, they have now got some funding across the country, and I don't know enough about it, but I know that that was in the works so that they could get some reimbursement through insurances. But man, helping people with some one-on-one goal setting and creating action plans and focusing on health and wellness, I think is awesome.
Well, this kind of bleeds into a future agenda item, but we can just go wild and be crazy with the agenda. The idea of bringing in somebody to talk about survivorship navigation, or whatever we would choose to call it, who has experience in doing that. I mean, basically more and more I'm realizing how many people across the country are doing amazing work that look like Maine. And so somebody made a comment once, and I think it's the right one, that it's not, we shouldn't try to emulate, let's say, what's happening at Yale or Dana-Farber, but something right size it, use a business term, to Maine. So I wonder, would there be interest in this group in having a bigger presentation or learning from somebody from another part of the country who has this type of service? Okay. Assuming I can find them. So, or one of us can. Yeah. All right.
So, well, I actually, at 3 o'clock today, I have a call with a bunch of people from across the country. It's a national program manager meeting that we're trying to start. So this is our kickoff. So I was kind of making a list of things I want to ask or talk about. So I will ask about that.
Cool.
What kind of navigation services, is that what you want me to ask? What kind of navigation services for survivorship?
Yeah, I mean, if a place that has some experience or a track record, that we could ask them what's worked and what hasn't worked, and then, dare to dream in a perfect world that they would be kind of what I've heard data experts call like a sister state to Maine. So someplace like West Virginia, or I've heard us compared to Montana, similar demographics. I mean, that's being picky, but I feel like that would be relevant.
Right, rather than a huge urban center. Place.
Yeah.
Well, maybe, maybe as Donna says, maybe there's a different term that we can coin that we can begin to use. And that's maybe something that you all in the community, the Maine Cancer, what are they called? The Maine Community Cancer Centers Association?
Yeah. Yeah. I know what you mean. Association of Maine Cancer
Support Centers. Yeah.
Cancer and Support Centers. Yes.
Yeah.
I would say I agree with Donna about language. I think that's very important. What I have found is that navigation means a different thing depending on who you talk to. So depending on what setting it's in, who you talk to, it means a totally different thing. And so, I think finding a word that's right for this would be really helpful.
Have you found anything, Katie, that you would suggest, or anything that kind of resonates? Yeah.
No. I mean, I like the idea of a coach, kind of a coach or an advocate or just something that helps. Because in my mind, I think you're helping the person identify that there's still more that can be wrapped around to help you through this time. It's not, you're not done. You have more that can be offered. And so having that advocate who can help you advocate for yourself within the healthcare field can be really helpful.
I mean,
I'm not
definitely
sure.
like oncology social workers do a lot of that work,
Right.
And therapists who have the experience like I do,
Right.
So just so I just need to clarify in my mind in as we're talking about terms. So is it more the concept of like a conduit? So I'm thinking of what you're saying about what the needs are, and is it a conduit just to say, okay, clearinghouse, if you will, but okay, this person, I'm going to pass it off to here. I know there's a program over here. So I'm just kind of trying to wrap my head around the tasks, not tasks, if you will, but what would be the top priorities that this position would be, or this idea would be?
I have thoughts around that. I feel like this position would be someone, similar, like when you start cancer treatment, you have various assessments to understand what your problems are. Well, I feel like it's going to be very hard to navigate people anywhere if you haven't taken time to do a solid biosocial psychoanalysis of what's going on, but including also that the ongoing physical needs, ongoing mental health, emotional needs, spiritual needs. So I feel like, to me, someone in this position would be helping to do both that assessment and then working on breaking it down into steps. It's very hard to get people to go do something if they don't really have a consistent idea as to why that would be important in the first place.
Mm-hmm. So that's a really good point, Stephanie, that having them receive some kind of a professional assessment, whether it's mental health or physical rehab needs, whatever.
It's probably got to be all of it, right? All of the above. Like when I did my, back to life, back to reality webinar, it was like I had a whole list of people that people might consider wanting to connect with different, providers. It's like you have your treatment team and then you've got your healing or your recovery team, and it's probably going to be multidisciplinary and involve also, addition to, connections with others in the similar place, so not just one-on-one professional support, but also the group support, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, because people are just left with this big mess and it's completely overwhelming, and they might find one or two directions they know they need to go in, but then get blocked because it's not an integrative, holistic approach to the healing process.
But don't you think providers think they're giving you that? They just don't realize that they're not. I think when I hear about medical oncologists and when they're delivering information and somebody's coming back for their visit and the scans are great. Your scans are great. You're good. I'll see you in 6 months, but could we spend a little more time? So I think people actually think they do that, but they don't.
Exactly. That's not their area of expertise, right?
Right.
That piece around exactly. I think they believe they are, and I'm not saying they're not, but the silence,
right.
Something isn't specifically asked, and it can silence certain things, especially when you think about really tender places like sexual health, and
exactly,
that's really hard to bring up with your provider, especially because they're naturally excited if your scans are clean. That is a good thing. We don't want to discount that, but yeah.
So that.
Well, I think about being a nurse and being in visits with patients. I'm just thinking about when patients would come back for the radiation follow-up, and maybe it's 6 months and they've got a scan, and maybe we treated a GYN patient, and I often would go into the exam room afterwards and say, so did you understand everything that the doctors talked about, and did you have any questions? And then what questions do you really have? So
exactly.
you ask another question to pull it out, because some of those questions just don't get on the table. And so that's where I think somebody like that would either help people, coach people to say, okay, what are my questions I'm going to have?
Exactly.
So that they feel empowered to do so, or, oh, I hadn't thought of that question, maybe I should. So that's where I always felt like nurses had an opportunity to kind of go back in. And sometimes, you know, patients would tell you things and it's like, no, I think you missed the boat. This is what it was really saying, you know, so,
Yes.
but how do you integrate that? And maybe some of that is kind of going back to when you think about the multidisciplinary team and trying to teach nurses in particular, or social workers, you know, to go back in and ask, so what else do you have for questions?
Totally.
You know, because it is a process.
It's totally a process. I mean, like, you know, you have to keep in mind that they're hearing information that they were anxious about, like, how's my scan? So even if they had a laundry list, they might forget it, you know. And in my visit with my oncologists, who I loved, were very different from my visits with the NP, who was like, so let me tell you this thing, and you might want to be aware of that.
Exactly.
Because there's a different, it's just a different mindset, a different way of working with people, a different sort of more, it's almost like street smarts versus book smarts.
Yeah.
You know, like,
no, I like that's a good analogy, really.
Yes, you know, so I mean, it's a gift that people don't just work with one provider, you know, that they have that, but yes, more and more of that needs to happen. And you're right, recognizing, because when my oncologist came to a presentation that I did, you know, she was very emotionally aware, but she's like, I learned so much just from you talking about your emotional process of going through treatment. And so thankfully she was very open and willing to give that information, you know.
Right.
And I do have to head out, unfortunately.
Can I just one point, in listening to you talk, I think it's important as we settle on a name, also to settle on the process, because it sounds like what I heard was ongoing assessment is just as critical based on other issues that may come up. So I think it'd be helpful to sort of define that role and say, what does that look like in real terms from the patient's perspective and then from the provider's view too,
etc. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and it depends on where you work as to what the role is and who the professional is.
Right.
But just recognizing that survivorship is a different phase of cancer care, and it needs perhaps a different team to address all of those needs.
Absolutely. All right, I will see you guys next month.
It was nice seeing you.
Fine.
I also have to get checked out.
Fine. That's
off
fine.
to another one.
Okay. Thanks for
Thanks,
joining us, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Yeah.
All right.
You might try, Tacoma Lakes for your kids, because they have a public swimming area there.
Tacoma
Litchfield.
Lakes? Litchfield.
Yep, Litchfield.
Okay. Thank you. I'll take all the tips I can
My
get.
guess is that there's a lot less people there than Rain Pond that draws in from all over that part of the state. Many people don't know about Tacoma Lakes.
Tacoma Lakes. Thank you so much. I'll take any more tips.
Hey, we'll see you guys. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah, well, this is great. I know we just have a few minutes left, and I think I've been overly ambitious with the agenda, but we're just always having such good conversations. So I'm glad of that. So I talked a little bit about the Navigator presentation, and then we already discussed how to maybe have a little more structured cross-pollination with the Association of Maine Cancer Support Centers. I think I'm going to ask their leadership team if at the next quarterly meeting we could put on the agenda how to better integrate survivorship with the work or the offerings they have at their centers. So I'll ask them, Katie's part of that group, and then get back to this group. And then I just include a link to Cancer and Careers. I don't know if you're familiar with that resource, but similar to vocational services, if you have a chance to take a look at it, I was wondering if it'd be helpful to have them call in to one of our meetings and just talk a little bit more about their offerings. Because I'm not that familiar. People bring it up a lot, but I don't know anybody who's used it.
And their materials are directed at patients, right?
I believe so. Yeah, their website is.
I can't access it right now, but I got a bunch of information from them, I think.
Okay, great. yeah, so I'll see if they're able to do that for us. Our next meeting is in August, the 14th. Is there anything else I may have missed? Burning points? Okay. All right. Well, I hope you just have a wonderful weekend. Summer, Maine, my favorite time. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right.
See you all.
Enjoy. Bye.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.